Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar. So glad to have you here. My name is Dan Cousins. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and the Head of Tutoring here at Bespoke Education. I've been here at Bespoke for many years, since 2006, in fact. I've done almost everything at the company, and I'm really glad to be a host and a presenter and a director, everything else of these webinars. Really glad to share these free information, useful stuff, trying to answer the questions that we're hearing from parents in our calls every day. So we're going to talk about executive function today. Before we do that, I'm just going to do a quick tour through Bespoke Education, its products and its services. So we're going to share the screen. Here's our website, just a few quick things that we're going to talk about. First of all, what do? We do test preparation. This is where we began as a tutoring company many years ago, actually with the biology subject test. We've expanded to the SAT and the ACT, pretty much every other test that you can name, we offer tutoring for it. So if that's part of your educational journey, please do check it out. We do college admissions. We've just hired a director of college guidance for our program who coordinates all the diverse products that are associated with that. So the college essays, academic advising during high school with the goal of getting into college, and then also admissions and essays advising. That's another big piece of it. A third really growing and special part of our work is called Bespoke Education Access. We do organizational partnerships with schools and non-school orgs to bring our expertise in test prep, in education, in tutor training to schools that need it. It's really special for us because it's a growing piece of the business, and it really lets us live out our mission, which is equity and access in education. Then lastly, and the segue to today, is that we really just know tutoring. We offer what's called academic performance, where we're engaged with students at every step in their academic journey. Specifically, it's something called executive function coaching and executive function coaching and homework help. In this case, this is what we're going to talk about. What is it? What exactly does it look like? And how does it work? And so, without further ado, let's begin. I'm going to welcome my co-presenters. So pleased to be joined here this evening by Dr. Jacqueline Reyna and Julia Saunders, who are colleagues of mine, of long-standing and a lot of close collaboration. Guys, thank you for joining me. First of all, thanks for being here tonight. So glad to have you. If you can just take a moment in that order, Dr. Reyna and then Julia, and just tell us a little bit about you, your background in education, and what you're working on with your students these days.
Sure. So I am happy to be here with you all tonight. I have worked with Dan for many years and worked with Bespoke in various capacities for the past 10 years or so. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I have a private practice in the city. I've been working with students for over 20 years, performing educational evaluations, and I'm happy to collaborate with Bespoke and in the great work with Dan and with Julia on the executive function coaching work. So we're excited to talk about that today. I also am director for a non-for-profit in Westchester and Putnam area. So happy to be here tonight.
Thank you very much. Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Saunders. I've been with Bespoke since January, but I've been working as an educator with a focus in executive function coaching for the past 6 years. So I actually got started in this work teaching and managing a cognitive enhancement program called CogX, which was developed by a research and development firm, and that focused specifically on improving executive functioning skills. So I'm really grateful that we've gotten to launch this really specific program at Bespoke, and that I've gotten to use my years of expertise to help our students with their executive functions.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure to work with you guys, not only on making this webinar, but also on creating this executive function coaching and support product. So we're going to talk about it. Couple of logistical items. We do have a poll, which we're going to launch now. If you can answer that. That will give us a sense of who is here in the audience. So when that comes up, please just answer, and then you can X out of it, and that'll just help us tune things as we go, because this is a live webinar and we're going to be responding to your questions as we go. So on that note, if you do have questions, please ask them as they come up. Don't wait till the end. Don't wait till the last 5 minutes. It's live, so we're really going to try to incorporate your answers into our responses as we go. There are 2 avenues to do that. There's a Q&A, which is available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Those questions are visible to all the participants, and we would encourage you to use those just because they add to the sense of a shared conversation that we're having. If you'd rather message us directly, you can use the chat, and that goes directly to us or to everyone if you care to. So there are 2 different options. Use either one if you prefer one or the other. So what are we going to talk about today? First thing is, what is executive function? I'm going to try to break it down, define it, and give you some of our understanding of it. The second piece is, how does support for executive function work? What are we doing? What is anybody doing? Not just a coach, but a parent or a friend, an uncle, aunt. What are they doing when they're trying to help a student support their executive function growth? And then the third piece is, how does our executive function coaching product work? How have we built it? And what are some of the key pieces of it that we think make it special? And we look forward to sharing all of that with you today. So to get us started, we're going to answer this question: what is executive function? And I'd like to put that to each of you, Dr. Reina and then Julia. In your professional role, what is executive function? And how do you find yourself talking about it and using it in your interactions? Dr. Reina first, please.
Sure. So, thinking about this question, the past kind of 10 years of my work, I really feel like executive function is a word that I'm hearing more, right? We're hearing it in schools. Certainly in my practice, parents are asking me, how is my child's executive functioning? If there is a challenge, what can we do? So I definitely feel like this is something that we're talking about a lot more. And I really like to describe it as a set of processes that have to do with a child's ability to manage themselves and their resources to achieve a goal. And they're doing this all the time, right? And executive functioning, that kind of big, broad word, is really just an umbrella term for neurologically based skills that are involved with mental control and self-regulation. And I'm sure some of you are thinking about some of the terms I'm going to say next related to executive functioning. Those skills are quite simply things like planning, managing one's time, organizing, attending to information, being able to problem solve, being able to have cognitive flexibility, being able to initiate, to self-start, also able to control our impulses and to self-monitor. And and all of these skills really roll up to that broad kind of term, executive function. And we use these skills every day in learning and managing our daily life, in our play. But at the heart of it really is, I'd like it to kind of break it down into a simple way, thinking that kind of a bite-sized piece of information, if you walk away from anything else, really is that executive functioning can be thought of as the skills behind the ability to execute what a student knows, right? And if we think about the development of some of these executive functions, and it looks like we've got a nice group today of mostly parents of kind of 6th through, I think, 12th grade, if I looked accurately at our poll here. And so, you can think, reflecting back to your loved one's development as we think about executive functioning, and these skills really start to develop in early infancy, right? And a lot of times in toddlers, we start to see these really grow so nicely in the very beginning of socializing and playing, and we see children developing the ability to attend to work out problems, to initiate different things, right? And these skills develop over time. And one of the things that we do know is they become really vitally important when a student starts school. And then even particularly more important as we're looking at that middle and high school age in one's academic journey. And there's real reason for that, right? If we think about elementary school, it's structured and it's warm and it's lovely and it's predictable. And all of that is purposeful and designed and critical, right? To kind of bring in the young learner. And gradually, as one goes from elementary to middle, there's a shift, right? We see a little less of the scaffolding. We see a little less of the support, and we start to see some expectation that the child's going to be a little bit more autonomous. And certainly that starts to come even more when the child transitions from middle to high school. And so that's why, and it's interesting to see our group of folks here tonight, kind of in that middle school to high school range. These skills we really start to see as really being important. And we really want the children to start to develop really strong organization and skills and the ability to manage their time and to organize and plan and to really develop strong emotional control skills to ultimately really go through the academic journey as autonomous and independent and confident as they can. And that's kind of that journey that we'll talk through tonight too, right? Is the continuum of learning with that. One of the ultimate kind of steps is it's not only the college prep and all of that, but it's that transition into becoming an independent learner in those college years when you're off on your own and doing the thing, and you want to make sure that you've got strong skills. So that's kind of in a nutshell, Dan, how I kind of like to explain it to families.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think one of the really important things to communicate today, and also that we've learned in our work as we've researched executive function and developed our expertise, is to understand that these skills develop at different times in a student's growth, and also at different times for different students who are the same age. So it's not a clear road, a clear line from beginner to master that develops the same each year. So understanding what is a reasonable expectation, what is a high expectation, and then what is an unreasonable expectation. And we can illustrate this sort of with an absurd proposition is we're not going to ask a kindergartner to plan and research and write a 5-page research paper. It's just not something that we would ever do. It's not reasonable. But the question of, do we ask a 4th grader, a 5th grader, a 6th grader, a 7th grader that's where that begins to get a little bit murky, and to understand that maybe for some 7th graders, that's not a reasonable thing to expect of them yet. And so in that kind of circumstance, that may be an area where they start to need some support, need a little more hand-holding than the teacher might be expecting to give them. And Julia, sorry, go ahead.
It's all good. I was just going to jump right in. So just to explain a little bit more of how I see executive functioning from the side of a tutor and executive functioning coach. So to me, it's these underlying skills that either help or hinder a student's success and their ability to do what they need to do and do it well. So for example, it's like, how does a student study for a test? How does a student get their homework in on time? How are they staying on top of their work? How are they managing a big project? These types of activities. And it shows up in test prep. It shows up with college essays, with homework help, obviously when doing executive functioning coaching, but not just in that area. And it can often be when a student is really struggling, it isn't always as a parent as, just like being confused in a subject or not understanding a certain thing, because it really comes up in all aspects of life, but it comes up in this almost like this invisible curriculum, which is a phrase we've talked about before. And it's this idea, or it's these invisible skills that are really behind everything they're doing. And then they're trying to, in school when they're younger, they're modeling these things and maybe they're explicitly teaching them, but at a certain age that, like has been talked about, there's no longer this hand-holding around it. And there's this expectation that these students have already learned these things, or that they are learning them in the process. And therefore they're not being explicitly taught or given the attention that is needed for a student who struggles in that area. So that's where we came up with this idea of invisible curriculum. It's like, you're supposed to be learning it, but it's actually not being taught. And if it's something that you just inherently struggle with, it may never get picked up unless it's actually, specifically targeted.
I love that phrase, and I think we're going to keep coming back to that of sort of what exactly are those items that are expected of students that are not necessarily said or laid out by the teachers who are also assigning the homework. Julia, I've got a prompt for you, or just a request, which is, can you give us an example of one of these moments where we get sort of the explicit ask, what the families come to us and say that they want or what they think that there's a problem with. And then once you've gotten in there and met the student and started to figure things out, what's the implicit concern or implicit situation that you're actually find yourself encountering? And can you talk about the match or the disconnect between those two things?
Yes, absolutely. So, I had a parent come to me wanting me to work with their student specifically because she was struggling in math class. And, while it is a subject that I think is harder for her, when I did a little bit of investigation, I discovered that she wasn't taking notes, that part of the problem was she was sitting next to her friends and getting distracted during class, and that she wasn't, taking in and synthesizing this information. And so she wasn't doing well on the test, but to me, it's like, oh, but of course, you don't have notes to study with. So that's an example of, it shows up as like, oh, the student's quote unquote bad at math. But the reality is, regardless of their actual skills and ability in math, that's not being unlocked because they're not taking the steps that they need in terms of like organizing, planning, self-monitoring, recognizing they shouldn't be sitting next to their friends in order to really unlock that potential.
Yeah. And that phrase in invisible curriculum, another way that I think of it, and it's really well illustrated by your anecdote, is sort of the, people say you go to school to learn how to learn. And I call the executive function aspects of this work the how to learn. That's the how to learn. That's where you're starting to get skills to be able to control your attention, to be able to make a study guide, to be able to break down a complex assignment into smaller pieces. And you're starting to learn it, and then you're able to do it time and time again. So that's kind of what we're going for here, is not just do we learn the things that you need to learn in math, but how do you take all the skills that you're applying to your academic work up? And I want to use a metaphor, actually sort of engage with the metaphor around the idea of challenges. In school, dealing with a lot of challenges, and people talk about that. And another way of describing them is hurdles. But I actually don't like that metaphor for these skills, for the executive function coaching skills, because the idea of a hurdle is it's something you have to jump over, and then you sort of return to the same level that you were running on beforehand. And the key with the executive function skills is that you have to jump up a level. The teachers in 9th and 10th grade are expecting you to do things at a higher level than you did them in 8th grade. Teachers in 11th and 12th grade are expecting a higher level than in 9th and 10th grade. So the student has to get up a level and then stay at that level. So for us, thinking about executive function, it's thinking about what are those skills that are going to be increasingly difficult or increasingly more complex that are just going to be expected of the students by the teachers as they continue in their academic journey. So that's our model. That's what is executive function. We're going to talk now about how do we support it? How do we work with executive function at various different ages, students with various different skill levels? And the way that we're going to get into this is, Dr. Reyna, can you please talk us through some of the work that we've done to develop a functional model for executive function, which lets us work on it in meaningful and concrete ways, not get too bogged down in the psychology or the neurophysiology of these skills?
Absolutely. I think you and Julia have done such a kind of nice job already highlighting. I mean, we know Bespoke has been doing really strong, successful tutoring for over 20 years, right? And in those very experiences, you started to see some of this stuff. Julia highlighted that really lovely. We think we're coming in for math and it's something else. So the kind of story behind the development is Dan wanting to talk about executive functioning in more of a formal way, highlighting that this is things that the company has been seeing, and wanting to take the expertise of meeting students where they are, which Bespoke does, of having a customized approach, which is what Bespoke does, but then saying, hey, how do we tailor this to really focusing on building students' executive functioning skills? And so that's where we started kind of pairing, coming together, and which was really fun, right? Bringing the clinical, but also with the practical, to make sure that the solution that was developed was going to be one that would really meet the needs of what you have been seeing in the students that you guys have worked with here at Bespoke. So, and critical to that was, in developing the model, is making sure that we chose working skills that were meaningful and could be actually done successfully in the coaching experience, right? As Dan mentioned, not so much heavy on the psychology, but bringing more practical things that could be worked on consistently, succinctly, to come to what, sustained success at school. Dan, that's what you're mentioning before, not just these small wins, but we all want this. I'm a parent, I have 2 sons, and you want for your children to have sustained successes where they enjoy learning. Learning is a lifetime thing, right? And so that's kind of the mini ingredients in kind of pulling this together. If you can pull that slide up, Dan, I'll start to walk through some of the kind of concrete skills that I'm talking about. And I think this will give everyone a little bit more kind of context to the work. So in developing our model, the first skill that we knew we needed to really address, and what's lovely in kind of creating a visual model, is it's something that the coaches have, so they know in the exact space that they're working within. It's something that the student has and the parent has, right? So it creates some nice kind of formality, while also being flexible so that we can be person-centered all the time, right? So that we're customized all the time. So the first skill had to be organizing, right? And that's the ability for an individual to efficiently impose order on their life, in play, in their workspace, in their bedroom, all these things, right? Organizing is so critical. And so when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about a student's ability to take notes, take organized notes, keep track of what assignments are due, keep their workspace neat, make sure, that they can see what's on their desk, right? Kind of organizing is key. The second skill, planning, right? And so planning, quite simply, is the process of thinking before doing, right? So it determines that there's a goal, as well as different activities that need to be accomplished in order to achieve the goal. And when we're thinking about this skill set, we're thinking about a student's ability to create a homework, task list for all the assignments that they have to get done. It's their ability to come up with a plan to execute against that list. It's their ability to know, gosh, what books do I have to bring home so I can study? What resources do I need to write that term paper? The third skill that was critical in our model was prioritizing, quite simply, the ability to make a decision about what's important to do, the must-dos, as opposed to the things we like to do, right? Which is what we tend to do more often, right? Folks tend to do the thing that they're good at, or they like better than the thing that's more challenging, or the thing that they might not like to do, right? And so really kind of helping students learn to prioritize is key. Again, some examples of that: sequencing, right? The steps in order to get a big complex task done. We need to know what order things need to occur. Putting tasks and assignments in order of importance for completion. Selecting what critical stuff I need to have in my binder, or that I need to take home to have success with the task at hand. The fourth skill was initiation, and that's quite simply the ability to start, right? To start a task timely without procrastination. And we just know, some folks are really, this is something that's easy for them. They're able to just start and jump right in, and others need a little bit of support. So this was definitely at the heart of one of the skills we wanted to make sure that we were attacking. And the fifth, managing time. which we all know as adults, right? Making sure that we can be present tonight at 6 o'clock. Managing time is critically important life skill. And really, it relates to a student's ability to organize their time effectively. And what do we know about time? If you can effectively manage it, it allows you to complete more tasks in less time, right? And because you're focused and you know what you're doing, and you're not getting distracted by outside things. And also a big thing about managing time is if we can teach students to really become as efficient as possible, we know that that does have a nice reduction in some of the stress that happens when students kind of get stuck in the loop of running out of time, and that puts undue stress. So managing time is something that we're really focused on, and some of the kind of skills within this area that we're looking at and teaching is teaching students how to estimate how long it takes to complete tasks, the concept of making sure that they have to be aware of how much time they have within their schedule, and does that meet what the tasks that they have are, their ability to realistically understand their own attention span and how long can they focus on something before needing a realistic break. So we're being as efficient as possible. So these 5 skills that I just went over are what we call our working skills. And in the center, you see 2 skills, and we consider these our foundation skills. It's metacognition and self-monitoring. And I had mentioned kind of earlier that really the long-term goal is creating this autonomous, independent, confident learner, right? And we often kind of envision those as they're going off to college, these types of students. But the truth behind it is if a self-regulated learner is someone that can do both of these things really well, right? They can apply metacognition and self-monitoring to their learning, this kind of back and forth, this kind of flexibility. And so we think of metacognition as thinking about one's own learning. And that's really important, knowing yourself as a learner. And then the second is self-monitoring, or the ability to monitor and regulate your own behavior. And this comes to academic skills and social skills. So these are really at the heart of our working model.
Thank you so much. It's really been a very helpful model for us as we talk both with our coaches, but also as our coaches talk with the parents that they're working with. And I would suggest, because this is not just for academic coaching, but for any parent who's curious, how do I start to have these conversations with my students? How do I start to include this idea of executive function or the invisible curriculum as something that we're discussing, something that we're working on? I would encourage you to start the conversation. Start talking about these things. And even if those conversations are hard to begin with, you've got to understand that there's always an interplay between what we've identified as the foundational skills and those working skills. That you can't just talk about metacognition. It's sort of that's a meta, it doesn't work. But if you talk about the organizing and ask them, how's that going, keeping track of all your homework, even that is a kind of conversational prompt that's going to spur them to develop some metacognitive awareness. That gets them to think about the process that they're using, think if there's something that could be a little bit better, maybe think what they see their peers doing or what their teachers are suggesting. So having those kinds of conversations, how did it go with the homework? How much time did it take to study for that test? Even those casual questions can really help to spur the metacognitive impulse. And that's the idea there, is that there's always this kind of cyclical relationship between the working skills, what they're actually thinking about and writing and doing, and then the ability to think and talk and control them, and then maybe hopefully modify them the next time around. Maybe next time I won't spend quite so much time on that one problem that I know I'm not doing well on, and I'll move on and make sure that I see the rest of the problems on the test. That's a pretty complex executive function decision to make, but you can lay the groundwork for it by having many of these cyclical conversations and realizing that even the small ones do count and they build towards something later on.
That ties really nicely actually into an example I have of working with one student on metacognition and self-monitoring. I had a student who, just looking at the working skills, they weren't, even though I had offered them a bunch of different strategies, they weren't making a lot of progress because they weren't doing it continuously. And so we shifted the focus and started having the student just work on doing nightly reflections and building a habit of just setting a timer for 5 minutes and writing a little bit about how their day went, and also building in this idea of like, and how did you do with, you know, your time managing, et cetera, the different skills. The idea being that without the ability to check in and become aware of how these things are actually, you know, affecting this particular student's life, that she was never going to be motivated to make any major changes. So I think that
very nice.
Targeting that in the work is really important as well.
Yeah. And that's something that you can start today. You can start it tonight. That idea of practicing the thing that you're trying to do. And that's a big piece of the working on executive function, supporting it, that we're going to continue to talk about. How do we actually practice it? And Julia, I'd love, is there another example from your experience of just how you're kind of getting real? How are you getting in there in the time you spend with a student to help them start to build these muscles in executive function?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of one student in particular where the ask when the parent approached me was that they had noticed that they were really procrastinating on big projects with history and English class. And so what our sessions would look like is we take these assignments and we break them down into smaller steps. We'd set deadlines. We talk about how long it was going to take to do them. We'd have set up plans for how they were going to then meet the deadlines by incorporating a little like mini daily schedule for the homework of like, and then what order are we going to put these things in? You know, when are you doing your math versus when you're working on this bigger project? And why are you doing which one first? And then what we do is these obviously, this sort of system got developed in stages. And then what we would do is we would check in, you know, in a couple days and see, okay, how did it go? Do you need to adjust your plan? Have you met your deadlines? So, you know, that's just an example of sort of the flow with one student in particular, where we kind of got into a real rhythm of that happening most sessions. But it, you know, it can look different too, depending on the student, right? That was like a particular situation with a particular issue. So that's just one example of the way sessions can look depending on the student.
Yeah. That really illustrates the value of reflection. Again, that sort of cycle between the self-monitoring and metacognition, and then going back to actually working on something. I want to draw out two more threads to support for executive function, which is something we do, but also something that anybody can do as they work on supporting a learner who's developing these skills. And the two words that I'm going to throw out there are dedicated and consistent. And work and support for executive function has to be those two things. I'm going to break it down a little bit just to tell you what I mean by these, but it's pretty straightforward. First of all, the consistency, as Julia has already illustrated, if you don't have a return to talk about the thing that you were talking about before, then you're going to miss those learning moments. You're going to miss the immediate reflection. That's the time that you get to realize that something wasn't working, and maybe now or next time I can do something different. So making sure you're having these meetings or these conversations in a consistent manner every week or every night at the start of the homework session or whatever it is, making sure they happen regularly, not haphazardly or not every other month when you remember to do it. And then the dedication is key, because a lot of students feel like they just want to start doing their homework, the first thing that occurs to them, the first thing that's on their assignment list, if they have one, and then they're just going to do the next thing that they remember and the next thing, and then they're going to be done. And the idea is to take some time before then. Take some time before the student jumps into working to talk about the work. So that's what we mean by dedicated, is that it is set aside from any time spent actually working on the thing, and it is dedicated to talking about everything that has to happen. Talking about everything that's due, not just this night, but maybe for the whole week, or maybe mention that big project that's due in 6 weeks. What are we doing today to make a little bit of progress on it? And that dedicated session, while it can be frustrating for some students because they're not getting right down to work, that's going to be key to make some of these changes, to practice some of these skills in a way that you won't be able to if they're just jumping in to doing the thing. I'd like to talk now. Oh, sorry, Julia, did you have something to add?
Oh.
Or not? No?
I had a thought, but
go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I think I just want to echo that these are skills that are based in habits, and that habits take a while to change. And, you know, if you are consistently showing up and putting dedicated work into that, that can happen, right? But just, you know, if I were to meet with a student once or twice and tell them a whole bunch of different things that would work well for them, it's really unlikely they're actually going to continue doing those things unless they're getting to continually reflect on that. And that's the benefit of that. I mean, I've had that experience before. I had a student who started out and they were doing everything the first couple weeks. And then, as I expected, it all dropped off. So, you know, the idea is that we're seeing like a gradual change in habits, not something that's happening all right away. And it's you know, echoing, that's part of the reason why it needs to be separate from homework time too, because if you're just pushing a student through one particular project and focusing on completion, not on the underlying skills, and really having the student be aware of that and really discussing it and talking about what's happening and how they're using these different things. It's kind of like trying to fix a hole in a wall while the house is actually still on fire. The student's going to keep doing what they've always done after the project gets finished, and the issues are going to continue in the future unless we are really like talking directly and working directly on these skills, you know. And it's worth it, right? Because these are skills that last well past the science project being turned in for the science fair.
Right. It's so true. I mean, you'll see frequently, we've seen this where an executive function coach or expert comes in and sort of sight unseen gives the student a whole new system with sticky notes, or I don't know how they're moving things around or keeping track of them. And it's almost a joke that you're asking a student who is struggling with executive function to learn a complex new system to manage something that is complex. And so realizing, again, that idea of what is unreasonable and what is reasonable, realizing that these kinds of changes that we're trying to make with executive function coaching and support do take a long time. So we're going to reflect now on what our bespoke education executive function coaching looks like, because we've tried to match what we've found to be successful in this work. So the meetings with coaches happen once a week. They happen at the start of the week. So that's usually Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, because you want a moment to reflect where you can look back at a week that concluded and look forward at the week to come, just because that's the functional unit of schoolwork. What is due this week? How do I plan out my week, etc. The sessions are online because we want them to be quick and we want them to be dedicated, and we want them to really be an opportunity for the student and the tutor to check in, to make sure they're covering the workflow and get the student set up for success for that week. And they also connect to things like their calendar, their portals, all of those tools. So we're very close to those tools. The other pieces of it, as we've talked about, it's dedicated, it's consistent. The tutors reflect back on their work and they share that with the parents. Julia's going to share some more about that in a moment. But another key piece of our work where we feel we've got some really cool stuff to share is in the assessments that we've developed and that we've incorporated into this program, which really help our coaches and help our parents, help our students understand what they're dealing with, and also to track the changes that they're trying to incorporate. So Dr. Reyna, if you could start and just talk us through those assessments. What are we working with? What are we using to track our progress, to see where we're at, and really figure out how to target our instruction so it's really right on for the students.
Absolutely. So in-house, we developed a self-assessment that a student can take and a parent can take in each of those working skills that I showed you on that model, as well as some reflection questions related to metacognition and self-regulation. And the reason for it really was we want to have good, strong executive functioning skills as coaches, right? We want to jump right in and really help the student and the family get right to the heart of the matter here, right? And so we felt like we've got these skills really mapped out. We've got what we like to call teaching activities really tied tight to each of those skill areas. So from that, we developed our own assessment. And so you can take it one of two ways, right? You can take the full assessment, which is you as a parent reflecting on your child's abilities in those skill areas, or we could do it in a kind of smaller, more bite-sized pieces where you just maybe take a 10-question assessment looking at organization skills. And that's really customized again, and that could be worked out between the coach and the parent. And then the nice thing is you, mom and dad, get to give some sense of where you think the skills are falling, and then the student gets to do it too. And it gives us a nice kind of starting off point, or let's look at these 2 points of organization and really get started. So that was the development of that. And then it also serves as a nice kind of feedback loop where we can go in 6 or 8 or 12 months and redo those surveys and go, hey, how are we doing? You know, did we build some skills in this area? Are we less concerned about this? And that's a beautiful thing. So that's our internal. And then bespoke, and I'll give you a brief little overview, but Julia is doing really cool work with what's called Mindprint assessment. But Mindprint Learning is a company that Bespoke has partnered with, and they have developed an hour-long online assessment of cognitive functioning for students between the age of 8 and 21. And it's this really easy to take assessment that gives coaches a really quick, fine-tuned understanding of an individual's cognitive functioning in 4 domains, looking at kind of complex reasoning, executive functioning, memory, and efficiency. And the cool thing is Bespoke is this is something that students can do for free when they're going through this, doing some work, doing executive coaching, and it's really awesome. So Julia, I'd love you to chat about it. I know you're doing great work with this.
Yes, it's really exciting. I mean, we have an official tool that reliably measures these skills, and it gives us insight into each individual student. And, you know, I can usually, looking at a Mindprint report, figure out ahead of time, like what some of the students' struggles may be. Because to me, what it reveals, you know, the Mindprint, when it looks at executive functions, it's actually looking at core cognitive skills. So these are things like attention, working memory, and processing speed. And these are the skills that actually underlie the other executive functioning skills we've been talking about in terms of organizing, working memory, or sorry, not working memory, organizing, planning, managing time. So if I can see that, you know, for example, one student struggles in attention, I'm going to get a heads up of, you know, what might show up in terms of what these working skills actually look like for them, like how they're managing their time if they have, you know, if they can't actually attend for more than 20 minutes, for example. So it's a good place to look for potential problems. It's also just one tool. You know, it's very helpful. And I think I've been having lots of conversations with parents about it recently, and I'm noticing there can be a real fixation on the numbers that come with it, but it's just one, you know, part of a whole picture of a student. And it's exciting that we get to use it because, like I said, it can really give helpful insights and also provides a lot of, you know, part of this test. It also provides strategies. So once you take the test, it gives you a whole list of customized strategies that you can then apply that are, you know, going to be most effective for you given your different cognitive strengths and struggles. You know, but outside of that, we also want to make sure we're paying attention, you know, not just to the numbers on the test, but to the feedback from the survey and to the conversations with the parents and the students, you know. So this is not to define anyone. This is just to give us, you know, some more tools and a little bit more insight into, you know, the why while we focus on the how as coaches.
Just a side note there is that special offer for those of you in attendance today is a free mind print and a free half an hour on the phone with Julia, the Julia you're speaking to right now, to discuss the results of that mind print assessment. And that's totally free, just a special offer for those of you who are here in the audience. So we're going to email about it afterwards. But if you're interested, please do take note and please do follow up. And that's going to last through the end of the month. It's been really neat. Julia's had some great conversations with parents in the last 2 weeks along those lines. So please do take advantage of it. So let's talk about kind of the last piece. As we've said, you've had these conversations, you've been doing the coaching, Julia. A huge piece of this is the coordination of all the different players, of the student, of the coach, and of the parents. How do we build that in, and how do we make sure that, in this case, sort of the left hand knows what the right hand is doing?
Mm-hmm. So, it really is a very important part of this program that the parents are, made to be part of the team, right? It's not just me and the student working in isolation, and then the student goes off and has, the next few days. The idea is that as a coach, is like my responsibility to make sure that I'm communicating to the parent, like what we're working on and why we're working on it and how they can support it. So something we've actually started as a practice with all of our coaches is that at the end of the session, the student and myself are going through, we're summarizing what we worked on, we're talking about the different things we used, the different things we developed, and then I'm sending that off to parents. It's great because I get to do a little check with the student, like, what did you get out of this? What did you internalize out of what I was teaching you? Do you understand what we did? Can you put it in your own words, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually like a really great metacognitive tool for them. And then it's also a good way for me to assess, like, do we need to, go back through this together? Do we need more examples for the student to really have a sense of understanding of what this is? And then also it's a way that I can, pass something on to the parents. I also think too, the communication really starts with the first phone call, because part of the process at Bespoke is when a tutor gets linked with a family, that there's this initial phone call with the parents. And that's a really good opportunity for me to get a little information about, what the parents are seeing on their end. And that is, to me, is vital information. Parents all have different communication styles, but I find it really valuable when I am hearing from parents, this is what happened this week, or this thing came up, because, not students, will let me know certain things, but depending on how strong someone's, metacognition and self-awareness may be, like, they might not recognize that, they, them like losing their binder relates to their executive functioning coaching sessions. So it is really valuable when I do have that feedback back from parents, and I definitely encourage it, because the idea is that, me, the student, the parent, we're all working together. Also the school, right? Usually I'm encouraging my students to connect with their teachers as it is appropriate, to help them with the strategies they're implementing and the different systems they're developing. So we're all working together to create this structure that hopefully, the student can then relax into and really get to unlock their own potential. And so it takes a team, right? It takes a village, as they say. And it all comes down to that communication, that ability to connect these threads so that everyone's on the same page and can help support the student succeed.
As you're talking, Julia, one of the things that I'm thinking about is just how in the session too is just all of that, just that simple steps of writing that kind of summary at the end is all modeling key steps in the model, right? And as you had highlighted, there's the skills are action-oriented words, right? And they're meaningful, and so they're integrated intentionally in the work as the coach is laying out, okay, what are we going to work on today? And just as you beautifully stated it in the summary of it, right? And so that it's in each part, each kind of moment of the time together is active work with kind of activities to take away, to try to experiment with, right? And come back with the goal of small, tiny, sustained wins that feel good, because when things feel good and we feel proud and we feel engaged and excited, we're going to keep doing those really good things, right? And we know sometimes when we've got to work on these types of skills, right? Their students might feel a certain way about coming to do the work, right? We tend to do the things we really like and that we're good at and kind of put away the other things. And so all of those small steps in an intentional way, as Julia was saying, really are what is, I think, at the heart of making this work really good and having the opportunity for sustained success, which is, you know, what we really, really want, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah. It makes me think of just that modeling, and then the fact that we need to connect it to not too much judgment, not too much sort of summary understanding of a student. Because if you tell a student that they're poorly organized or you never remember anything, that becomes a definition. And that becomes a self-definition of, oh, I'm hopeless. I can never remember things, or I just can't get control of my life or of my homework or whatever. And so by talking about it, by looking back, by looking forward, what we're trying to do is put these skills into a context where they are skills that a student can make progress at. Maybe they had a bad week of it. Maybe they didn't forget or they didn't remember anything, but they're going to keep trying. They're going to keep trying the skills and they're going to make some progress. And I think the idea of having these regular sessions where they're talking about it with the tutor and checking in with their parents and reporting back about it, it helps bring this conversation away from a conversation of judgment and into a conversation of skill building, kind of building muscles. Yeah, you can be weak, but if you do some exercises and do some stretches, you'll get a little bit stronger and get a little more flexible. Maybe you won't be a star gymnast, but you will be better at that thing. So turning it into the realm of exercise rather than judgment. And I just want to share a quick anecdote of a student of mine who was many years ago who got to 7th grade and sort of the walls fell down on him early. Usually it happens in 8th grade or 9th grade for some students, but for him, it was 7th grade. And when I showed up, he was actually hiding in the basement. He'd given up and 7th grade was too hard and he felt like it used to be easy and now it was difficult. And we talked about it, got to know him and what he was doing. And eventually, and it took some time, but eventually I realized that it was just sort of the flood of information. There was too much stuff coming at him and he didn't have a way to sort through it, a way to make sense of it. It just felt like too much to even start. So for that student, what we did was we got out of his portal, because the portal was contributing to it. It was too many reminders and it was all disorganized. And we just settled on Post-it notes on his computer desktop. That was it. So every assignment that he had, we brought it onto the Post-it note for the day. So he had a list and it was organized by the subjects that he was going to be teaching, that he was studying that year. And so each subject had bullet points, what he needed to do. If there was a big bullet point, we would then break it down into smaller bullet points, things that he could do that night. And I was really proud of this student because this became sort of his lifeline. He knew he would sit down. The first thing that he would do would be to get everything onto those Post-its and sort it out in the Post-it. It was kind of a very, very confined and manageable view. And then he would be able to begin. And what became what started as a really hopeless student became a student who felt like he was in control. He felt like while things were difficult, and he was never a super great student, he never became a straight A student, but he became a student who felt like he knew what he needed to do to get things done, and that he knew how to prioritize and how to make choices that would help him feel on top of what he needed to do. And that was a really cool sort of sense of progress to see. It's really practicing these skills in a way that helps them get out of a mindset of self-judgment and sometimes despair.
Oh, I love that story so much, just because one of the things that I think is the most powerful about this work and the hardest about seeing students at the beginning is typically when a student struggles with executive functioning, their confidence and their self-esteem also has a huge dip. And, there are students who just need someone to like walk them through like how they can best support themselves and the systems that are really like gonna help them be successful. And it's like the difference between someone potentially thinking that they're, incapable, or, I hate the word stupid, but it's like people, when they don't do well in school and when they're experiencing failure over and over again, they start to internalize that as their identity. And the beautiful thing for me is like helping a student actually start to believe in themselves again and see their own potential. And, it also fits into like, obviously, that we can talk more about another time, this idea of growth mindset, right? That if a student's struggling, like it's so important to, help them understand that it isn't like their struggle doesn't define who they are. Like they are not a failure, right? But that as they start to, see these, see that they just need some support and some structure, and they can, really, unlock their own potential. And it's just like, I don't know, it's like why I like doing that is to see students not only have.
Right. It's like a weight has frequently been lifted off the students' shoulders when they start to have some tools to manage the kind of overwhelming input from their school. We don't have any questions. We've got a couple minutes left. Dr. Reyna, I'm wondering if there are any questions you remember from talking with parents about executive function, some of the common questions, or anything that you recall as parents being curious about that you might state and then respond to in our closing moments.
Sure. A lot of times when I'll meet with a family and go over psychoeducation evaluation, and if there are weaknesses, in any domain, but particularly in executive functioning, obviously as a parent, the first thing you ask, right, is like, can they get better? Can they overcome this? Are there ways to, support? And the beauty is, I hope we did it in a succinct and insightful way, but the answer is absolutely yes, a resounding yes, that these are skills that certainly can be supported, honed in on, worked on. I think the key thing that I share with parents is don't be nervous, like pause, just because if we're just finding out now that this is a gap for a student, let's take a breath, relax, and then start to attack it kind of as a unit, as the coach, the student, and the family member. A lot of times I feel like parents get tough on themselves, right? We've all gone through the pandemic. It's been really a tough time, particularly for our students who've gone through school, adapting and adjusting. And so a lot of times it just is take a breath and be kind to yourself, right? And let's see how we can start to work together towards building and reshaping skills. And they absolutely can strengthen. I think the two words that you had mentioned, is, dedication and consistency or commitment to the thing. Change takes time. If we all reflect on our own self and the things we want to change about ourselves, they take time, right? And it takes dedication and attention and kindness towards it. And so I think if you have a child who's on this journey towards kind of wanting to build these skills, or you think they might need to, it absolutely is something I think that can be successful, but with those ingredients in mind.
Thank you. We are at time. I just want to close by saying thank you to Dr. Reyna. Thank you to Julia. Thank you to our attendees for being here, for joining us. Please remember the mind print and the consultation offer. And I just want to end by saying the calls to Bespoke are free. Please do call us. We have many years of expertise, not just in executive function, but in every step of the journey to college for your students. And we've talked with parents, talked with thousands of parents to answer their questions. So even if tutoring or coaching is not in the cards right now, if you've got questions, please do call. We're always willing to answer and always trying to offer some helpful advice, as hopefully this webinar has communicated. So thank you all very much and have a good night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.